Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here. If you love focused, efficient learning, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're going on a fascinating journey into something that is literally all around us, yet we constantly try to escape it. I'm talking about the surprising reality of stillness. We're going to unpack the science, the psychology, and the hidden power of simply being quiet. I want you to really think about this for a second. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No podcasts, no background TV, no fan whirring in the corner, no music, just nothing. For a lot of us, just the thought of that brings up this sudden weird wave of anxiety. But why? Why does this simple absence of noise feel so uncomfortable to us? What are we actually running from?
All right, section 1, the fear of silence.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to explore humanity's struggle with stillness, both historically and today, starting with what happens when this discomfort turns into a genuine, diagnosable fear. Because if you feel a twinge of panic when the room goes dead quiet, your anxiety is completely valid. There's actually a name for it: sedatophobia. The word comes from the Greek sedate, meaning silent or dead, and phobos, meaning dread. Now, what's wild is that 50 years ago, this was virtually unheard of. But today, psychotherapists are seeing massive spikes in this condition. Modern technology has fundamentally exacerbated our constant need for noise in human interaction. For someone with sedatophobia, it's not the dark that's scary. It's the absolute lack of sound. And what's really interesting here is how physical this condition actually is. This is a very serious modern affliction. When a sedophobic person is suddenly left in a quiet room, maybe during a power outage or taking a silent exam, the sheer absence of background noise, like a TV or a fan, triggers intense, visceral symptoms. We're talking shivering, sweaty palms, rapid heartbeat, even overwhelming feelings of detachment or panic. The body literally goes into a fight-or-flight response just because the room got quiet.
But let's ground this in history for a minute. Because while our smartphones definitely make it worse, this isn't purely a modern problem. Consider this brilliant quote from the 1600s by the French philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal. He said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." I mean, wow! Even centuries ago, thinkers recognized our deep-seated need for constant diversion. Pascal realized that without entertainment, we're forced to sit alone with the heavy truths of our existence. And our egos, well, they'll do absolutely anything to keep us distracted from that.
And Pascal wasn't just observing this in other people either. He felt it himself. He wrote, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces fills me with dread." Think about that. Even a brilliant mathematician felt existential terror at the idea of the void. When we look up at the infinite, quiet universe, it forces us to confront our own scale. It goes to show that this fear of silence is a deeply, universally human condition.
Moving right along to section 2, the neuroscience of silence.
So, did you know that the dread we feel isn't just philosophical? Let's pivot from the emotional fear of silence and look at the fascinating, hard biology of the brain. What is physically happening inside your head when the noise stops? Well, we tend to think that without auditory input, the brain just kind of powers down its hearing centers. But actually, the complete opposite is true. The auditory cortex actively fires. Neuroimaging studies show us that, to the brain, silence is literally never empty. Let's break down exactly what that means. The auditory cortex activates in a few really fascinating ways when it's quiet. First, through expectation. If you're waiting for a sound, your brain lights up in preparation. Second, through mental imagery. Like if you've ever had a song stuck in your head, your auditory cortex is actively hearing that inner music. We also see spontaneous intermittent activation and heavy involvement from the frontal lobe, which controls our attention. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this: your brain is actively working, scanning, and imagining, even when it's completely quiet. Which brings us to section 3, the cost of connection. Now that we understand the history and the biology, let's look at the societal impact of our flight from silence. To do this, we're drawing on the incredible research of Sherry Turkle, a professor at MIT. I want to share a visceral anecdote from her research to really humanize the data we're about to see. A father recalled that when his first daughter was a baby, bathing her was a deeply fulfilling time of bonding and conversation. But with his second child, he found himself making sure the water was safe and then just sitting on the toilet seat checking his iPhone emails while the toddler bathed. He knew it wasn't right, yet he couldn't stop. We are constantly replacing quiet, meaningful moments with digital noise. And the cost of that replacement? It is staggering.
Let this massive number sink in for a second. According to studies over the past 20 years, college students have seen a 40% decline in all the ways we know how to measure empathy. 40%. And the primary culprit? It's the presence of phones and our inability to simply exist with one another without some kind of digital distraction. And it gets worse. A Pew Foundation study found that 89% of adults took out a phone during their most recent social interaction. But here's the absolute kicker. 82% of them freely admitted that doing so actively diminished the conversation. I mean, think about that. We are willingly destroying our interactions, fully aware that it's hurting our relationships. And the kids? They are definitely noticing. Turkle's research features story after story of teenagers explicitly saying they do not want to raise their own kids the way they're being raised. They are practically begging for tech-free meals and actual presence. Just look at exactly what we're trading here. On one hand, we have mere connection. It's sending a transactional email, shooting off a text, keeping things surface level and distracted. But on the other hand, we have meaningful conversation. This requires eye contact, it requires pauses, it allows for imperfection, and it's deeply relational. Avoiding the quiet, unscripted spaces in human interaction literally destroys our capacity for empathy and creativity. All right, Section 4, the power of awkward silence. So, the million-dollar question is, how do we fix this? How do we take silence, which we clearly fear, and use it to our advantage? Let's pivot toward the solution and reframe that awkward silence into a really powerful tool, particularly in our professional lives and workplaces. First up, we need to recalibrate our tolerance for quiet. Here's a surprising fact for you. Cultural norms around silence vary wildly. Research shows that just 4 seconds of conversational silence makes English speakers incredibly uncomfortable. But a separate study found that Japanese speakers are perfectly happy with up to 8.2 seconds of quiet. What feels like an absolute eternity to one culture is simply a thoughtful pause to another. We really need to stretch our tolerance. Drawing on methods from the Brief Lab, we can actually break silence down into 2 categories. Planned silence is deliberately building quiet into a meeting, like, say, taking the first 2 minutes to silently read an agenda. It creates reflection and focus. Then there's unplanned silence. This is navigating an unexpected lull in a conversation. Both are powerful if you know how to use them, but unplanned silence is usually the one that makes us panic and start rambling, right? So, here are some highly practical steps to handle that unplanned silence. Next time you're asked a tough question, Step 1, purposefully pause for thought before answering. Step 2, use nonverbal cues, like nodding, to show you're fully engaged. Step 3, maintain a calm presence. If you project calmness, it instantly puts others at ease. And Step 4, let the silence speak for itself. Resist the urge to fill the void with meaningless small talk just to rescue the moment. Trust me, mastering that 5 to 7 second void gives you a massive advantage in communication and negotiation. Finally, Section 5, reclaiming the climate. Let's move to our concluding synthesis. We know why we fear silence, we know what our brain is doing, and we know exactly how it's impacting our empathy. So, how do we practically integrate this paradigm shift into our daily lives and reclaim the quiet? Sherry Turkle suggests some great actionable first steps by physically blocking noise from what she calls our most sacred spaces. Start by declaring no phones at the dinner table. Keep devices entirely out of the kitchen and the car, because these are prime locations for spontaneous, meaningful conversation. Give your kids, and yourself, honestly, a traditional alarm clock so you aren't falling asleep and waking up to a glowing screen. And at work, actually schedule explicit, quiet prep time before jumping into meetings. And when it comes to digital communication at work, Turkle offers this brilliantly simple piece of advice. When a manager or colleague emails you a complex question, instead of rushing a half-baked reply just to prove you're online, reply with 2 simple words. I'm thinking. This sends such a powerful message. It resets expectations, it proves that 24/7 digital availability is not a requirement, and it shows you value the question enough to sit in quiet contemplation before answering. Which brings us to our final, lingering thought for this explainer. You now know that the noise is just a distraction from the beautifully complex reality of being human. You know that empathy is built in the pauses. So I leave you with this challenge. Are you finally ready to put down your device, step away from the endless digital chatter, and bravely face the quiet? I highly encourage you to try it today. Unplug, sit quietly in a room, and just see what you discover. Thank you so much for joining me on today's explainer. Now go enjoy the silence.